Hey, welcome. I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming. We're really excited to have these guests with us tonight. This is the second lecture that we, the Graduate Architecture and Urban Design Department, have presented this fall, and we're excited that tonight is going to be our critic at large, Gary Bates, along with his partner, Anna Bates. Gary was here this morning meeting with our first semester students. It was a great session. He talked a lot about his past experiences and current sort of work experiences, as well as the work of the studio. And he is excited to hear from you all with questions after his presentation. So the title of his lecture is, or of Anna and Gary's lecture, is Inception, and a little bit more about that in a minute. Gary and Anna Bates have a firm called Make Make, which they formed in 2021. This practice seeks to unite architectural thinking and making in a contemporary framework, and it builds upon the work of their independent practices. And then this quote I took from their website, Make Make, making as opposed to designing, making that takes in consideration the many implications of urbanity, community building, reusability, economics, and risk-taking, making for humanity. They also state, to make is to emphasize, to exaggerate the process of making itself, making the real and really making it, always shifting, questioning, and debating it. Make operates globally at all scales. Recent projects include the Zoozeum, an art center in Latvia, an exhibition mounted in Berlin that has now come to New York called Inception, which is a collective project of 111 architects exploring ideas about collaboration and authorship. A project called Garden, located also in Latvia, that looks at the relationship between public space, domestic space, and nature, and the Radisson Blu Polar Hotel, located only 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole. Anna Bates began her career in interior design and today maintains a separate practice called Anvil, which is a multidisciplinary global practice that spans scales from interiors to urban planning and includes self-initiated projects. Anna is also a member of the Syracuse Architecture faculty. Gary Bates graduated with the BArch from Virginia Tech. He co-founded Space Group in 1999 after working with Rem Koolhaas as a director at OMA, and prior to that, working with Daniel Liebeskind. Space Group is an international interdisciplinary practice based in Oslo with urban projects such as master plans, transit hubs, and train terminals, as well as residential projects. Gary's held positions on the faculty at Syracuse, Columbia, Cooper Union, Oslo School of Architecture, and the Berlage Institute in the Netherlands. The book on their Inception exhibition documents their experiment on art and creation with the 111 Architect Collective. I look forward to hearing their presentation as well as to our conversation. Welcome again.
I'm not even going to try. Should just go. I don't think so.
We got the blank.
I pushed the laptop button.
Oh, yeah, it will. It should, yeah. Sorry. It's not on Google Slides, so it should. It's good. It's just the power. It doesn't matter.
We're not even plugged in. Yeah, that's it.
I know a quick introduction. I'm going to do a pre-introduction and then an introduction, and then I'll introduce you. Really happy to be important for me when I was kind of presented with that opportunity. I wanted to also kind of rethink what a critically large could be, just kind of what the nature of our practice is.
Gary, you need microphone.
No, I don't.
They're saying they can hear.
I know. You can't hear? He's a musician, so if you can't hear, I'll use the microphone. Oh, great.
And there's 3 on the chairs.
Yeah, okay. Hello. Hello. So the critic at large. I was kind of presented with that opportunity, and at the time I wasn't really sure what it meant, and I started to kind of think about it, and bombarded with emails about what I wanted to do as a critic at large. And essentially what was really important for me was that the critic at large position would be something that would be adaptive, that would take all the kind of the knowledge and historical kind of qualities that are developing and emerging from the school itself, and actually use that as a kind of driver for the position rather than the position kind of driving in additional kind of frameworks. It puts kind of enormous responsibility because then each time I should adapt to the situation that is kind of that's put on the table relative to the work that you're doing. Today I looked at first year MArch. So it's quite frankly a bit daunting. The first session, Farragut Housing, was a bit more straightforward because it's something that I'm kind of generally working with in terms of affordable housing. Today was challenging because we started to break into a conversation relative to form versus shape, to look at section and the potential of section, inside-outside, envelopment of space, color and definition of section. We started to talk about underground. And in preparation for that, I had to kind of go back and look at myself, and that's what makes it, I think, a really interesting flip of the critic at large, being from the inside out rather than from the top down. So what I needed to do is I needed to go back to my education in the 90s, and I needed to kind of look at that and start with an education for me, which is kind of predicated on an enormous amount of theoretical reading, particularly the Foucault, Derrida, and the French philosophers, and how that can somehow manifest itself into an architectural discourse, which then transitioned, so that was kind of where I started my career, that transitioned in the early 2000s to a conversation that was initiated by particularly by Sarah Whiting and Bob Sumal. Sorry, I'm really, it's been a long day. And that was going into what they call the kind of projective practice, starting to look at the performative nature of architecture, where RAM, of course, played really critical in that transition from a theoretical to this performative projective practice, which then subsequently a close friend of mine who came out of the big soft orange Dutch environment, which is Michael Speaks, who's currently the dean, formerly the dean at the University of Kentucky, now the dean at Syracuse, and he introduced a conversation which was called design intelligence, which kind of liberated us from theory, shifted the conversation into one that dealt with the indelible kind of relationships specific to the collaboration, the multidisciplinary nature of architecture, and more the tools and technologies we have. We also migrated in that conversation through the 90s, the paperless studio, experiments in form, and kind of ended up with a more open-ended conversation of where we are now. And I put a couple of kind of things on the table, and for me it was really an interesting exercise to do because it also helped me reflect back on my work and look at how I've navigated these 4 periods. So the last period, one could say Reinhold Martin from Columbia is leading some of that conversation in terms of another role for the architect that I think you guys reflect increasingly more so, which is navigating the kind of complexity of the world that we kind of live in now, with also a certain agency that has an implicit activism built into it. And I think that becomes kind of really interesting, that shift, something that we didn't necessarily have. So that was the conversation this morning, summarizing, because it was a really amazing conversation with the students. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of where we are now, and Inception is kind of where we're starting. So that was my pre-introduction. Is this working? You ready? We're good? Okay.
On computers.
Yeah, on 2 computers? All right. I think your text will be here too.
It's not,
Really?
but it's fine.
Okay. So, by the way, that's my daughter, so the crying doesn't, if I get incredibly nervous, normally I wouldn't, but I really didn't want her to miss my first major public lecture in New York City. So, I'm very happy she's here, although she should be in bed right now. Luca. 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 Hey. All right. We're intellectuals and technicians, artists and engineers, social anthropologists and policymakers. We have an immense range that spans across and oscillates between disciplines and professional areas of practice. The complexity of what we do often obfuscates the simplicity of it. Moreover, what we do is changing, especially as we, architects, respond to the many challenges that confront the world today. And perhaps the most notable change is a shift that is occurring in architecture as a discipline and a profession, where the architect is concerned mostly with buildings, to a shift where the architect is a facilitator of ideas and methods for approaching the world. Architecture school is a culture that binds all of us together, you, the students, faculty, and guests together. It's a culture that enables you to see through a different lens, an equitable one, a spatial one, a collective one. It's a culture that educates us to appreciate and make use of the unexpected relationships and connections within the frame of making. This is a quote from Nicholas Borja that I really like, the author of Relational Aesthetics. Interpersonal relations that form the ultimate source and object of inspiration and creative work. Hence the title Inception. Architects are makers. We make relationships, we make frameworks for communication, we make equitable spaces, low threshold spaces that engenders the diversity that releases our humanity. And through this making, we provide access. Access to conversations, to information, to ways of seeing and reading people, space, condition, and ideas. Our office is built on 3 really simple premises: humanity, disruption, and wisdom. This is something that we've now, over the course of the last 30 years, built up and genuinely stand strongly behind. And what you'll see throughout the lecture is each of the projects is framed within these 3 topics with these subtopics, and you'll see how the projects gravitate more in the direction of one of these 3 nodes. And so each project has a direct relationship. Some are more disruptive, some are more humanity, some are predicated on a history and wisdom that allows us to kind of unlock potentiality that we didn't originally understand, but we're able to, through the process, kind of find an agency, through partnerships and adaptability and entrepreneurialism. So that's how we've organized the lecture tonight. That's how we talk about our work. This is the entirety of the work we're going to look at. It's a phenomenally long lecture. I apologize for that. When you invite 2 people who both want to say something, then you're going to get an exceptionally long lecture. But those are the projects and their relative relationship, which you'll see again. This image will come again singularly with each project. The white dots in the middle are the projects that we're going to talk about tonight. Inception. Taking this one or that one? Take that one.
Hello, everyone. So,
How does inspiration work exactly? Exactly. Can we as authors call the work we create our own? Or do others play a significant role in our individual creative process? This is what we set to find out. Inception is a collaborative experimental project by academics that emphasizes a new way of thinking about authorship, collective creation, inspiration, and ideas. It began with the painting called The Rhythm of a Russian Dance by Theo van Doesburg of MoMA Permanent Collection as the initial source for this research. We gave it to the first architect who created an original work inspired by Theo van Doesburg's painting. The first artwork was then passed down as an inspiration to other architects. These architects respectively created their own works: paintings, sketches, pieces of architecture, photography, and even poetry, and passed them down to the next ones. So the process continued. During the time of 42 months, 111 architects from 5 continents and 28 countries collaborated to create a dynamic chain of collective inspiration. We called the project Inception. In August 2019, we combined and showcased all the 111 works at David's Gallery in Berlin. Additionally to the exhibition, at the beginning of February, we are launching a book that documents the process and presents a collection of all the works created for the project. And tomorrow we are bringing the Inception exhibition to where it all began, Deep New York City. This is where you come in. To bring the exhibition to New York.
So, this book was not guided by the theory, but yet it grew out of searching for new ways to look at authorship, inspiration, and ideas. If we look back in history, before our era, the creator was always as we, as society, not as individuals with egoistical approach. We look, even in medieval times, writers and philosophers were afraid of coming up publicly with their own innovations, yet they praised it into collective creation. The modern idea of authorship comes along with innovation and creation. What brings you to social prestige and recognition and great financial stability. In the last 20 years in the United States, there were more disputes for authorship than in the whole 19th century in the world. One of the cases in the 80s was Rogers versus Coons. Rogers sued Coons for rights of authorship, but Rogers made a photography called Puppies. Some years later, Coons made a kind of sculpture inspired by that. Rogers sued Coons for the rights of authorship, but court was not convinced by the argument of Coons about parody and postmodern art irony, and he lost the case. So I started to question what actually is inspiration, what is authorship, and what is authorship in the modern sense, and how outdated actually is the idea about it. So thinking of all that, I started an experiment. Before I started the process, I asked one of my friends, architects, what is he thinking actually about this idea of the book, and he replied instantly. He said none of the architects will ever want to show where the inspiration comes, or none of the architects would be they wouldn't like to be inspired by somebody else creating kind of a work out of that. So I tested the first brief I sent to the architect Julian Desmet, and he as well replied instantly.
Wait, we promised we were not going to call him out.
Did we?
Yeah, you just did.
So he as well replied instantly. He said, "Oh my God, how boring it is all about this topic, how outdated it is, And so I was like, I just moved on. This all, his like kind of resistance that pushed me even stronger to test out the idea. So I started with Gary Bates, and then it started to bounce all around the world. And then
I was also very hesitant, I have to confess.
he was. And then, actually, when it was already moving all around, then Julian came back and he was like, wait, but if I would know that I'm the first one, then I would actually do it. So the first outcome of the Inception was in Berlin, in Aedes Gallery. And back then, there were like 100 artworks. And the main idea was to install it on the ceiling, that we're able to see actually the whole, how the actual movement was happening, how the inspiration, how it was moving from one to another. And just a few days before the exhibition, one day before the exhibition, the people from the gallery, they said, I'm sorry, we cannot make it on time. Because it's like kind of Germany, everything is like, we're ending the work at 6 o'clock. So we are just like, we're just going away and we will come back tomorrow. But again, we will have 9 hours only and probably we'll have some 70 works, not more than that. I was like, well, it's not possible because the architects, everybody is coming, it's kind of really weird to kind of hang only half of it or whatever, partly. And then within one day, like a group from Latvia, people just jump on the next plane and they did it. They worked 24/7 and they hang till the last second before the kind of exhibition was opening. Like they hanged and it did it like all pretty on time. Yes, so this is the exhibition. And at the same time on the floor there were like the whole map, how they were like going from one to another, and above that you could see the actual work.
Cool, thank you. I generally don't talk about work, but I use work to talk about ideas, meaning that to go through an entire project and kind of break it down, there's so many histories and stories in it that, you guys don't know Norway or the climate in which these projects are made, and I think it's really difficult when architects show, fantastic pictures of their work, but it's difficult for us to really frame them or contextualize them or see how they could potentially give inertia to the conversations that you want to have. So I really try to frame work around ideas and try to use work to instigate a conversation. So the main thing with the projects that we're going to show is to try to pull elements out of the projects and, to formulate certain conversations. Anchoret is a housing project. It's on the west coast of Norway. It's part of a master plan that we were tasked to do. The master plan looks something like this. The government approached me in the summer and said, can you make a plan for this area? I said no, because it's Norway, it's the summer, and no one works in the summer in Norway. They said, we really need a plan. The plan we have is not suitable, and there was a competition. We did the competition, and were fortunate to win. The competition was based on a simple idea. There are 7 buildings versus dividing the site into plots, which is what you would normally do, and then sell plots and design building on plots. We curated the 7 buildings in such a way that the space in between became the focus. We removed all the traffic, which is driving through the middle of it, and split the site in 2. We reorganized the traffic around and created a property that was facing the boardwalk, facing the waterfront, and created 3 public spaces in between, and assuming that we weren't going to be able to do any of the architecture. It's kind of what we generally assume when you have a master plan of this size. So it's about 600,000 square feet or so. The building I'm going to show you now is this building. This is the school completed. This is the second one, and we're about to start on the third and the fourth one. So we actually are in this fortuitous situation where we're going to work on all the buildings. This is the building in its kind of rendered form. Really interesting because we're doing a lot of housing now here in New York and just looking at the value set. So the project was in the 11th hour stopped by the government because there's 72 apartments in this building. The regulations are such that every apartment has to have 5 square meters of outdoor space where that outdoor space is 3 hours per day in the sunlight. Private outdoor space, 5 square meters on March 21st and June 21st has to have sunlight. 3 of our apartments didn't, and the project was canceled. We negotiated and found a way to compensate that space. In addition, everyone has to have 15 square meters of shared private outdoor space. So shared for the building, private for the building, of outdoor space. And those have the same light conditions. 50% of that outdoor space has to have 3 or more hours of sunlight during those 2 solstices. Super difficult to design for, and that generates, but it's also incredible, an agenda. Every apartment has this demand for daylight. Every apartment has a private outdoor terrace. Every apartment has this shared space, which creates a sense of community. Challenging enough for us. Every single apartment is different. There's 72 unique designs for the apartment, a big challenge for us. I won't deny the fact that we lost 3,000 hours designing the project. I was just there a few weeks ago, and the project looks like this. Incredibly impressed by the precision of it. The large staircase you see brings you to a private courtyard, and that private courtyard is where the shared outdoor space, together with the roof terraces, occurs. It looks like this. Standing inside that space. Here it is under construction, early construction. Now it's almost complete. The entire building is up. Here on the right side, you see that staircase on the bottom that brings you to this courtyard. You see the common shared roof spaces, the private roof outdoor spaces, and the private terraces that everyone has. So there's just something about this value set that we found particularly, I think, important and unique to this idea of living in Scandinavia. Suzanne.
Some time ago, I received a phone call from the most influential art patron and collector in Eastern Europe with the request for commission for the design of the gates. I thought it's an interesting request from the perspective that it was not even the main gates. It was somewhere the gates around the corner of the building, like some super unimportant door. So I thought I will definitely meet up with the guy to see what he's up to. Few days before the meeting, I was actually in Berlin for the opening of my exhibition of Inception project, and by accident, at the end, after the exhibition, I got the blue eye. So I went to this first meeting with a person I don't know with the blue eye. And it turned out we started from small-scale temporary project into a transformation of a 100-year-old cork factory into one of the most important contemporary art centers in Baltics, and giving a new meaning to the whole neighborhood around the center. It's a long-term investment into largely neglected part of the city, providing it with much-needed quality of public space. We made outdoor space at the museum into a meeting area for people of different walks of life, as socially diverse as the neighborhood itself. The central courtyard as an art object, the same time as a stage, as a bar, as a meeting area, and residency for artists. Community garden accessible for the whole neighborhood. And each area is multifunctional for diverse use. One really important move we did is that we got rid of the parking and cargo entrance and turned into the main access point into the museum. Here you can see to the space, the art space, and this is see-through from the gates of the yard to the sculpture park. So here you can see the exhibition center. This is the multifunctional roof as event space, outdoor movies, bar. So this is the roof in use. Yoga classes, the view from residence of artists into the yard, and the lobby and entrance museum. The exhibition space at the same time as yoga classes in the morning. Kind of cool to have yoga in between art. This is a pop-up outdoor cinema in the garden. Concert in the exhibition space. Sunday art classes for kids. Residences for the artists. This is actually how the project looked like before we started to work on it. I would say the image you see right now, I would describe it as a color code of Riga. Besides the constant bad and gray weather, the all colors of the city are usually brown, gray, black, and dark in general. At the same time, the city is super mega conservative. So for me, it was crucially important to turn up the volume for the color and make it as positive as possible. It took lots of long, strategic, and persistent discussions with the client to get him into the color, the orange color, which created the connection, the communication, the discovery, and mutual inspiration for the users of the museum. At the same time, bringing the spark of inspiration for the whole neighborhood and the city of Riga. We convinced it as a democratic idea which helped to make art more accessible for different audiences. We started as pop-up version and ended up as contemporary art space museum called Museum. We are still working on the project, continuing with the community garden. I remember we were having a walk with the client around the project in the opening of the museum. We stopped in the yard. He looked around, and the yard was here. And he said that everything here seems so wrong. It is so wrong that it's becoming so right. I thought this is the best ever reflection and compliment I ever heard from the client. And I made an artwork with the slogan and gave him as a thank you for this incredible project and journey together. And addition for his art collection.
Okay, so now we're migrating closer, let's say, into this idea of adaptability and agency collaboration. Teze Bazaar is a project that Anna and I did together in Baku, Azerbaijan. It is, it's a fascinating place, which I'm happy to not be working in anymore. Many kind of challenges, but at the same time, an incredibly rich culture. what really kind of fascinates me and always fascinates me, and I was describing it with the students earlier today, is that the work that we do, as you also saw in the former project, which started with a renovation of a door and kind of expanded to a building, which expanded first to a large community space, which expanded now to a large park, and looking at it urbanistically and making these kind of connections. And similarly in Baku, we were confronted with a market. The market had a problem, and the problem was simply that people don't go to the market anymore. This area, in its history as it grew, became increasingly high-rise buildings with young professionals who all want to go to one-stop shopping. So the idea of going to a market to get your food was becoming increasingly difficult for the vendors. We were approached by someone who said, we want to renovate the market here. We want to keep all the vendors. That was kind of one of the keys for me to actually get involved in the project. We want to keep all the vendors in place, and at the same time, we want to kind of modernize the market and give it a quality that will attract and bring people back. So how do we do that? The project started, and one of the things that was kind of important for me, here are some of the spaces inside, some of the colors, some of the materials that were there, some of the floor patterns. The roof became, surprisingly enough, an inspiration. We made 2 designs for it. The building has a 20-meter height difference from one corner to the other, so 60 feet, let's say, which is quite enormous also to kind of navigate, roughly 5 stories. So you're traversing the space over 5 stories. On the one side, you have a new major boulevard with all high-rise and young professionals and supermarkets. And on the other side, you have one of the historically most kind of dispossessed and impoverished parts of the city. And naturally, being who, let's say with my kind of reference, I really wanted to find a way to create space for that kind of dispossessed group of people and how they could be a part of this project, a lot of them which also work in the market. And here we are as we move to the backside, and you see, so this is literally the back corner of the market that you see here, which is now stepped 17 meters down. In the background, you see the shiny new high-rises. This is the development of the city, 1894 to 2008. The square being the market, and how that space has kind of become, let's say, slowly the city has kind of grown around it. And you also can very quickly see the map, the kind of density of the fabric to the left side, and the simplicity and the shadows of the fabric on the right side, suggesting that development, which is really split on the road to the right side in this major boulevard. So that led us to kind of a certain approach. This is the layout and organization of the market as it is today. These are the kind of organizational, how the existing circulation works through the market. The arrows, the lower level, the lowest point is the bottom right, the highest point is the top left. And you're actually able, with that path, to navigate it only with stairs at the lowest part. Of course, we wanted to get rid of those stairs and make it universally accessible. Meeting the vendors, thinking how to incorporate their materials. And back to Anna's description about Inception, when I was preparing for the lecture, one of the things that kind of dawned on me, and I was trying to kind of understand, let's say, where my own inspiration came from, and it's something I never really kind of considered, and I was like looking and thinking and lecturing and talking to students, and suddenly 3 references that I gave all came from the same architect. It's a female architect from Brazil named Lino Babardi, and this is a project from Lino Babardi called the Sesc Pompeii. And I was there many years ago, and this space, and it's also in a similarly, let's say, historically challenged neighborhood, and looking at these spaces that are low threshold space, back to Norway again, and this low threshold, and possibility to come in, read the newspaper, play cards, talk to your friends, but also culture and theater that happens. But it was really important for me, and that led us to a kind of investigation that looks like this, from the Bursa Bazaar and the series of bazaars that you have in the east, and trying to understand the nature of the organizations, the nature of the streets, the nature of the courtyard, the extroverted versus introverted, the street shopping, and how the spaces were organized. And we slowly started to break them down into kind of different typologies that you see here. And each one of them has, as I said, an interiority, an exteriority, an interior street, a courtyard. Some shops face the outside, some face the inside. And we started to collect it. Here is a simplification there. Here's a series of those spaces that we kind of examined. We examined them in terms of scale and their performance in time and in program. And so what we started to do, and the drawing on the right became the most important drawing for us, was to say, if we're able to design this negative space, if we're able to design these courtyards, if we're able to have complete control using the materials from the market, upcycling the materials that were already there, and saying each one of those would have this strong connection reference to the entire space. It was super important for us to do that and understand that the people who are coming in from the street and the people who are coming in from the neighborhood here below would have this commonality. And sorry, this drawing is a bit confusing. This is a second level that stands on top of here. Each of those then courtyards became a potential for the unexpected, potential for uncertain things. Previously, you saw the diagram of the circulation. This is the new circulation that allows us to kind of navigate these 17 meters on the right. And each one of those colors actually represents a different user. So we really then started to use a kind of detailed understanding of how a mother who's coming to grab some food on the way home, a family that's shopping, or daily shopping, or weekend shopping, individuals who are coming just for food, for lunch, for example. Then we started to look at the materiality again, and that color palette, and look at some of the histories. We went into really elaborate and detailed understanding of fenestration, brick and brickwork, really some specific details that you'll see there that allow us to create and maintain what was going to be an outdoor market. That was our intention, to keep it outdoors. And a very specific roof structure. The roof structure has, let's say, a couple of things that are important about it. Number one, obviously, there's an incredibly strong sun there, which we needed to kind of protect the market from. The roof is made up, as you see, using both structural plywood, wooden beams, and a substructure. So you see 3 layers of wood, 4 layers of wood, including these wooden beams here, a simple steel frame that allows us to lift these pieces. They're super lightweight into place. They're facing a direction that is then not impacted by the predominant wind. There's incredibly strong winds in Baku. So its orientation is related to the wind and solar diagram, inspired by this, again, back to inspiration, this painting from Fontana. And here you see the kind of structure in place. So these are actually, the curves are, let's say it's a double curvature that you get that allows it to be closed on one side and open in the direction to let light and air into the space, as you see in the far right, for example. So that's the building, the facade, the MEP. We did one interesting thing with the, besides light and ventilation, water collection, a lot of times we have these conversations with students. For me, it's a baseline. For me, every project has to have that ambition to look at how we can kind of, rather than waiting for Paris Accords to tell us what the, where the targets are, or New York City telling us what the environmental targets for your building are, we have to determine those. We as architects have to take agency in that, and the starting point is to try to take everything off the grid. Now I have a market. One great thing about a market is it produces a massive amount of organic waste, right? Every day, fruits and vegetables being thrown away. That organic waste can then easily be consumed in an anaerobic digestion system that can give us then gas for operation for restaurants and cafes, can bring us energy and electricity. And so that was one of the, and the owners were completely confused. They're like, wait, how much energy can we generate? We kind of calculated the market, we looked at their daily, and they said, but if we drive around the city with a truck and collect everyone else's garbage, can we get more energy? Can we actually sell energy? I said, well, you could do that. And that for them was a kind of unheard of idea. And it's actually really straightforward and really basic, and we won't go into detail about that. Well, maybe in the Q&A I can tell you what really happened then with the project. We'll get into that later. The next project I'm going to show you really quickly is Nedergata. It's in Oslo. It's an adaptive reuse project. We were approached by a client who operates a film studio to do animation films. They work for Hollywood in Norway, and they wanted to do a collective of all the small-scale film producers in the city and bring them together under one roof. The building is an old textile factory. It was in complete disrepair. And the city said, the only way we'll let you do anything with that building is if you return it to its original shape, its original form. The only problem with that is that there were no records of what its original form were. So we had to prove to them what the building was and get acceptance on that and try to return it to that shape, to that form. And this is what we started with. So this is the shape of the building when we got it. In my eyes, incredibly beautiful. In most people's eyes, completely useless and worth demolition. And we started to slowly transform it. The building on one end of the building, to the left, houses the art studios, film studios, incredibly highly performative, both in terms of screening rooms, which are in the lower part of the building, and as you migrate higher up in the building, greater need for daylight, for meeting spaces, etc. To the right side of the building, just out of the picture, is a contemporary art space. The contemporary art space looked like this inside. What we did is we excavated out the entire floor and built an energy center that would supply energy for the entire building so we could take the building off the grid, in part using geothermal energy. Very difficult to build because we're right next to the river, so the water pressure is continuously pushing into the building. As you see on the right-hand side. The strategy for daylight, as I said, we introduce the building that we saw in the nearly demolished state was to the left. We introduced this glass roof, which is certainly not original. That allowed us also to bring light deep into the space. Obviously, the film studios are on the bottom. Cinema studios on the first floor where they edit the sound. They have daylight, but they need to have dilatation so that anyone can stand outside the room and yell and scream at the top of their lungs, and you can have perfect silence inside the room, incredibly performative and not easy to do in a kind of industrial, historic kind of building like this. Here you see the technical space that I described on the right-hand side. The building looks like this now on the inside. This is in that central space. There's a garden in that central space. Let's say that's where everyone who works there kind of meets. This is the main level, the entry level. The CNC'd walls you see on the left or right are actually 60 centimeters or 2 feet thick, with dilatations in the floor. You can see how it's slightly suspended above the floor. Those dilatations mean that I can jump up and down, and that sound is not transmitted into the sound rooms. The stair was produced by a guy just across the river who hand makes and works with steel, and so we use that kind of expertise to bring inside the building. And this is the lower level, moving up. Here you've come up that stair. You're on the main level. We designed the desk that you see there to the left. The entry is in the back. The glass roof is then the thickness of those beams. You'll see air jets that are collecting both heat and how we recycle heat across that glass. The sound room, moving up through the building. An important detail, which I always kind of share with students, is that a lot of these historic buildings, there you see the green wall that I talked about in the meeting space. The entire second and third floor are retracted from the facade to kind of allow those facades to kind of remain as they historically were. And so it's a, let's say, the gymnastics of kind of separating, as you see in each case, this dilatation, that the facade is distinct from the floor plate and not interrupted. Here again, from one of the meeting spaces, an office that you see in the distance, another office which we're standing inside of, and its relationship, which is varying each time to the facade. A traditional way of treating the brick with a wash. Yeah. The art gallery, really simply, artists in residence on the top, which have kind of already the perfect roof for it, which originally factory, now has been converted to each one of those being an apartment for an artist in residence. Really simple. We built this incredibly expensive underground energy center, and then we painted the building. And that's all we did. We did three things: energy center, paint, and a stair. The stair kind of transforms the notion of the kind of art because it allows them to do lectures, have seating, exhibit on the steps, have a library underneath the stair. So the stair became the one move that that kind of transformed that space and gave it the kind of kind of made it operative, made it performative, made it available for speculation. Here you see it. As I said, paint, stair, energy center. All right. Really quickly, hotel. I'm not going to show you the hotel, but I'm just going to break the hotel down into all of the design that we did in the hotel that was, let's say, related to. I mean, you have the hotels itself, and it's a idea about a hotel which was based on. We wanted to create an atrium hotel. Atrium hotels become challenging from a developer point of view because it means you have single-loaded corridor. Single-loaded corridor is more expensive. We managed to convince them of a kind of hybrid model of double-loaded and single-loaded corridor. We also have a 2,000-seat conference center, which means that we create two atrium spaces, one for conference and conference spill-out, and one for the hotel and the hotel guests. And unfortunately, you're not going to see the hotel. You're just going to see details of the hotel. This is the hotel, if I was going to discuss it. On the waterfront in Trondheim, as you can see, the triangle there is kind of atrium number 1 that relates to the conference center. The atrium number 2 is under the skylight that you see in the distance. The hotel looks like this in plan. So, in doing the hotel, we made a 400-page book that kind of documented some of the most important kind of moves that relate. This is really specifically for design and where our design sensibilities and aesthetics lie. This is with the facade. The facades look like this. This is a kind of study model for the facade. We had one person work 1 year designing the facade, designing every pixel. Very difficult and frustrating for this person to see a round dot need to go through square to get back to round again. This zone, we spent 1 year of our life trying to solve, to eradicate that without drawing each dot by hand, which is also not possible, to get this transition. That's the first iteration of the print for the facade, which looks like this. Which looks like this installed. And then from the OMA kind of legacy, we went and photographed every single room from the same vantage point, which I'm not going to show you every single room, but we have a 401-page book of just the rooms that look like this. These are actual photographs. So those are actual photographs from the room. Carpets. We design all the carpets in the building. Each one kind of related to specific spaces, use, colors. I wish that I had Anna's help on the carpets, which I didn't. She's an expert in color, and I'm not. We designed 9 chandeliers. Each chandelier is based on, those are the mock-ups for the chandelier on the left. That's the plan for the chandelier, and its shape you see on the top right. That's the section of the chandelier using LED light. This is the LED diagram of the light. That's an actual picture of the chandelier on the left, installed from the bottom and in perspective. This is before lifting it into place. That's an actual picture of it with the light off. The contractor Skanska, one of the largest contractors in Europe, kind of approached us and said, well, in the conference room, we need to do something with the walls. And they're a really large contractor. In Norway, everything is GC, so you translate. The architecture moves from the client side over to the general contractor side, and his job is, of course, to save money in every corner he can, and asked us to make a design for the walls and the acoustic performance of the walls. And these were a number of studies that we did. They gave us a budget, and we operated with that budget to kind of design the facade. It looks like this inside the conference hall. This is under construction, where you can see the wall. Each angle deals with reflection and absorption. And here you see 2 of the chandeliers in place. Bathroom, which I'm not going to talk about, that you walk inside and see outside, that looks like this. As you can see, the view outside from inside. This is the mirror in front of the sinks in the bathroom. These particular walls that you see here that are form, that are special mold form that gives you both some views from the corridors behind that look like this. Each one is a little bit less than a person. You see a person on the top left. The end result looks like this. This is a picture from one of the bridges looking down. That's the entry lobby. That's the reception desk for the hotel. This is the wall of the conference center. Each laser cut piece of, each flap is laser cut and hand bent to create a kind of pattern of a swarm pattern that looks like this. And then back to the inspiration, which number 2, this is Lino Bombardier again, from the same project, where if you don't know the project, it's on the left is our sports halls. On the right are locker rooms. The bridges are collecting the sports halls to the locker rooms, which I can't deny the fact that something happened to me, but I never made the connection before yesterday when I introduced this picture. But clearly, there was some movement there in my brain, as Anna was pointing out. We're moving now closer to disruption. I was approached by one of the largest developers of shopping malls in the country. He came to me with his economic plan. He showed me, it's basically a floor plan showing the economic performance of each of his shops. He didn't want anyone to know, so we had secret meetings in secret places around the city. We met, and it was clear the shopping mall was losing money, like it was kind of bleeding out. And he said, what do we do? And I said, well, it's obvious, you need to get rid of the shopping mall. He says, but we're shopping mall developers, we can't get rid of the shopping mall. I said, there is no place for a shopping mall in the center of the city. It's clear, no one goes to the 2nd, 3rd floor of your mall. We need to get rid of that space. I said, we can compress it on 1 floor. Essentially, the project is 4 or 5 major moves. Move number 1, eliminate the shopping mall. Move number 2, to turn the building inside out. Move number 3 was to invert the cores from shopping mall entry into foyers and vertical transport to offices above, to turning those outside and making the side streets, which were completely dead, because it's a shopping mall and you have kind of bridges that connect these three buildings together. It was a shopping mall spanning over three buildings. The side streets were completely dead, dark. You would never go down them alone at night. On day one, before we started, I said, just get rid of the bridges. If I can do one thing in my life, I want you to delete those bridges so you could never go back and have a shopping mall again. So they demolished the bridges even before we started the project. And the building was amazing. This is how the building looked. This is from 1931. They built incredible machines inside the building. I always find it kind of a bit frustrating that there's this nostalgia about these industrial buildings that, that they're kind of rough and dirty. Well, they were building extremely precise motors for large seagoing vessels. It was just like the equivalent of the time of a kind of Tesla factory, right? Just really precise. And so this idea of this, and I think that's a little bit of the problem with this entire place, and you see it also throughout the United States, is this kind of romanticization of these industrial buildings. It became similar here. So there are these replicas, because there's a multitude of buildings, but these two are the only original ones, but everything else kind of looks like them in an extremely cheap clad version of these buildings. These buildings themselves had, over time, developed hundreds of artifacts that were built on site: fake balconies, large awnings, and they essentially destroyed the building. In the 80s, they brought in an architect to renovate these buildings, and he, of course, dropped 8 or 9 floor slabs that all cut all these beautiful windows in 2 and 3 pieces, and filled it with offices. So you have 3 floors of shopping mall and then offices above. This was in the 80s, a very common time when those things happened, I think, throughout the world. The building looked like this inside. This is our master plan really quickly. The yellow represents the courtyards and this inversion that I talked about. The side streets are these streets that you see with a pixelation that became part of the paving. The waterfront is here. We designed all of the outdoor space, all the interstitial space, all the courtyards. And the interesting thing is this idea of kind of invisibility, because it's not a project that's kind of shouting, which I think is a problem generally in architecture, like, look at me, look what I did, like, now I'm going to use every opportunity possible to kind of stake my claim to some sense, some sort of authorship. Actually, I just thought the project was already, in and of itself, great, just generation upon generation had really screwed it up. And I said, what can we do to kind of, what can we do to do small, iterative moves, erasures, to kind of return some of the quality of the building, but also kind of make it performative for contemporary society. So this is how the building looked. This is how the building was when I got it. That's what they managed to make in the 80s. Fantastic. It's like a fantastic expression of contemporary architecture. It's shiny, and it's useless, and it is inundated with objects that make no sense whatsoever together. It, of course, has, fantastic escalator, and this is the space that I deleted. That was my contribution. The architect who did the building, who's one of the most prolific architects in Norway, I had him in a meeting, and he said to me, Gary, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. He doesn't speak to me anymore. This is the diagram that we started with. This is the first sketch that I received from the client. This is all he said to me. What do I do? As you guys can understand, green makes money, everything else doesn't make money. Right? That was the diagram I got. So it became pretty self-evident of what we needed to do. And the labyrinth that you see on the ground floor is also kind of completely hopeless and impossible to navigate. It's also kind of stepped and ramping, handicapped, inaccessible largely. So a complete nightmare to kind of navigate through that space. So this is what I did. Everything that's red is deleted. This move that you see going diagonally through the 3 buildings is what I call the clean cut. We cut a trajectory, a space that is semi-climatized, going from the main public space in front of the City Hall building to the main public space, main kind of courtyard and public space on the top left. And each of those large forms here that you see, these rectangular forms, became different atriums that were existing but renovated and given architectural clarity. And the clean cut, when it intersects a column, the column remains. When it intersects an elevator, the elevator remains. These are all the things I happily deleted. If there's anything that you see in this picture that you think was a mistake to delete, please let me know. I'm sure they still have it in storage somewhere. This is the condition of the street. As you can see, what I meant by you would never walk down that street. It was a service street. This is how it looked when we got it. Those are the bridges that I asked them to delete. Here is the kind of non-original, so this is the historical building with all of those balconies, amazing lights, kind of obstacles for pedestrians to protect them from delivery vehicles, which are now underground. These kind of beautiful steel columns and red handrails and horrendous cladding on the building to the right. And this is the space as it is currently today. The building on the left got a new facade. The building on the right deleted all of those objects and obstacles. This is the cut. It looks like this. That looks like this inside. The paving from the outside continues inside. And just here it's polished, outside it's rough. Here it's white in the courtyard to reflect the light. So what we calculated and what you see here with the colors is that obviously the top says structure, facades, container, the wrap, and the cores. We removed 25% of the building area. Again, difficult for the contractor to remove so much, to create and to bring back these double height spaces. The lobby for the offices, the side streets, the entry. We removed 25% of the space, and in year one, with 25% less area, they had a 35% increase in volume, in turnover. So much less space, much more turnover. For them, completely confusing. They didn't understand. One other anecdote I can tell you is that when the building opened, the first week it opened, they called me and said, "Gary, your side streets don't work. There are no people on them." I said, "Did you put any furniture out?" They said, "No." I said, "Okay, put furniture out and call me back." They put the furniture out, and suddenly all the shop owners opened their doors and people populated the side streets. This is a picture from Christmas, which I don't particularly like, but my staff told me to keep it in. Staying in the industrial world.
It's a factory in Riga called Briggers. Looking back into history of it, in 1849, gifted soap maker Brigger launched the first perfume factory in Riga, Latvia. In 3 generations, the company went from having a few employees to becoming the dominant manufacturer in the region. Afterwards, in the period of Soviet Union times, the factory was taken away from the owners and was in use for the society, as it usually happened back then, meaning the factory was a property of the government, property of 52 buildings. In the Soviet Union times, the factory was serving with the legendary cosmetic products to all parts of Soviet Union borders, which was called the Zinters. The factory by itself, the facilities were really known as the city within the city, with their own microclimate, their own traditions and rules. That's why the people who work in the factory were involved in the decisions of the designs, the design, since they are the main users, meaning that not owners or CEOs were our clients, but actual users of the project, of the factory.
This is the kind of initial drawing from the master plan, which was really, for them, challenging and contentious. The main challenging thing that we said is that we wanted to remove the wall that excluded, it basically was like an old school factory that you would see where you kind of, everyone comes through a gate and puts their card in the slot, and what happens behind that wall is a bit like a Charlie and a chocolate factory. We said we wanted to kind of remove those gates and open the project up, so these spaces, a beautiful existing park, where the gate once was in the middle, and then what's going to be their new headquarters, and created these 3 parks where there are different degrees of access, but those 3 parks would allow you to come in and see into the production factory, to allow you to come in and use that space connected to the headquarters, and to have a really beautiful public garden that was already cultivated there. In addition, the proposal that in the future, as they release their borders increasingly so, a street would connect through all 3 of those parks, and eventually housing could be implemented there on the top. So demolishing a large part of the underused buildings in the factory. So this is the existing with their 52 buildings. The next slide. Oh. And then with the demolition, their buildings, and the green is kind of the space that they would give over to future development.
This is the headquarters. And this is the first part of the commission, which is the factory facilities. And the clients, with whom we were taking all decisions. So, and this is what we came up with. So this is the factory, and we created a double facade as the entrance for excursions that people are able to see actually the factory, how it is, how it's actually produced, the cosmetics. We open the facade from the perspective that we open all the windows till the ground, and to kind of implement more daylight. We added some of the spaces were like closed, and as a second floor were on the top, it was like kind of as a rest area. So this is the facade with the daylight. So, and this is what we came up together with them. This is in a way the scheme of the, I would say the mood is like from 70s, 80s, as it was back then. So there you can see again this the double facade, where is the corridor for the tourists. Here you can see there's the second level for the rest, for the clients. Tomorrow we are actually getting from the government the approval, and the construction work is starting. So this is the first part of 52 buildings. And this was the dress code they chose.
All right, I know we're going over time, so I'm going to show you 2 things really quickly. You can stop me if it's too quick. I want to show this house. I'm not supposed to show this house, not because it's not private. This house is one of the first projects we ever did. And it was done it opened in 2003. But, there is always this kind of critique. Well, yeah, of course, if you have a lot of money, you can make a kind of fantastic house. True, But what I think is exceptional about this house is that I leveraged the fact that the client did have a lot of money to take a high degree of responsibility in terms of his experimentation with forms of construction, his experimentation with certain environmental prerogatives that we established that you generally wouldn't do for a private house, but more so to explain to him that he needed to take a social responsibility. And the house ultimately won what's called in Norway the Howens Prize. There are 50 buildings, or 100 buildings, so it's over the past 100 years, and I think only twice it's been given to a house. So it's a really important kind of prize, and I think subsequently he understood the importance of the experiments that he kind of let us do. The house looks like this. The structure that you see both on the top left is created by using a sandwich construction of steel with blown-in insulation, which allowed a kind of rapid assembly by creating a rail system and sliding this roof into place. Again, an inspiration, which I'll show you, is that hole in the middle, which unbeknown to me is the third time I'm going to reference Lino Babardi and her beautiful house. That's a photograph of an octopus silk screened onto the glass to keep privacy from the entrance. There are 3 entrances to the building. Entrance number 1 is behind the octopus. Entrance number 2 is into the void. And entrance number 3 is under the lawn. And this is a beam going across the face of the rock. That's me on the left, under construction. There are the steel cassettes that are incredibly thin, so of course they still have a cold bridge, so they have a thin layer of insulation on top, 50 millimeters, that facilitates that cold bridge break and gives you a highly performative, fast construction. Now, a challenge as a young architect that I didn't perceive was this was done using the shipping industry. So there was a shipping wharf that was downstream from us that I knew that I wanted to work with. Really high precision construction. The problem is that the architect, or that the normal general contractor has 0 precision. So when we suddenly get on site, when the shipping industry says something's going to hit XYZ, it's within millimeters of XYZ. The concrete wall is within a foot of XYZ. And so the structures didn't align when we got on the site. Slightly problematic. The walls you see on the left are the divisions between the children's room. They're 55 millimeters thick, a composite structure with concrete in between that are supporting the concrete deck so that there are no columns. The whole entire house is supported on the steel, which when welded together becomes a 2-dimensional, and with the folds of the roof becomes a, let's say, 3-dimensional structural plate that's only supported on the periphery. The walls are supporting the floor of the floor of the kitchen. The columns inside the house all have the same width, and their depth is regulated according to their structural performance. So in an effort to not waste any material, every column is individually calculated and sized according to the load that it needs to take. Something which I think is really cool. The kids' rooms. The kids have a composite textile, high-speed textile with felt on the inside. The walls being metal or magnetic. And the father draws for the children on those walls. Here you see on the right the roof being slid into place along those rails, which then are subsequently removed as a kind of temporary structure. And back to the inspiration, but in my case, the inverse. This is the house, the private house of Lino Babardi, where you enter the house through a stair in the middle through this void. Of course, a modern move, kind of very modernist move with this gigantic cantilever, something that I particularly wanted to get away from. The students have heard me talk about the end of the modernist project and what that actually means and how your generation represents possibly an end to the kind of overbearing modernist project that we've all been subjected to. But at the same time, that move of entering in the middle was really important, just that we're entering down through the middle. And here's where you're entering down through the middle of the house. On the right is a staircase that goes through the void there under the cantilever of the library. The steps are cast in as part of that slab, fairly difficult move to make. That's the staircase. So this is the former one here on the right, here in place. That's the welding master on the right. They had small kids, so in netting. Here's the driveway for the cars that drives in against the mountain. A really interesting anecdote. The project manager said that supporting that deck on the landscape was not possible because the rock wasn't stable. I said, the rock is absolutely stable, and it's important for me to expose this rock face to not add any additional material there, and I want to support the structure on the rock. He said, I'll call in a geotechnical expert, we'll evaluate the structure, and we'll make a conclusion. I got the geotechnical report. The geotechnical report supported what the project manager said. It's not possible. We have to kind of build a concrete wall and support the deck. I said, I want a second geotechnical report. I went and got a second geotechnical report. I learned subsequently that it was a family member of the project manager who did the first technical report, and it actually works. And it's still there today, 20 years later. The library is on the right side. The facade opens up in the library. The house is incredibly interesting in the way that I remember when I visited there with my son, we were over in the kitchen area, and he asked who lived in the other house next door. That's the library, which popped up with that stair. He uses it for music, DJ, escaping crying kids, etc. All right. I think this is the last thing. This picture is incredibly important. It's a skateboarder, of course. But what's important is that the project that we did, this is taken by a famous Norwegian photographer named Mette Trondvold, who does largely portraits. And what's important about the picture was that the project was so contentious in every aspect of what we were trying to do. It was a competition for a public space in the middle of this town, the largest growing town in the city. What's contentious about it, number one, is that we were going to remove all the car parking, which of course is like in New York City unimaginable. Whenever I say it, people say you're completely crazy, we need our cars, you can't do that. Here, of course, they said the same thing. Our project won on the basis that we removed all the cars, which they thought they would put underground, not knowing that we were not going to let them put them underground. Additionally, their bus depot, we argued that there was no room or need for a bus depot in the city. Of course, the traffic guy said there is a need, so we did a full traffic analysis of the entire city, including their new regional bus line, and we showed it to them, and they said, you have no idea what you're doing, you're not traffic consultants, this is completely absurd, and we're not going to consider what you've done. They did consider what we've done. They agreed that it was better. They got rid of the bus depot and made a drive-through bus lane and used our design for the regional bus line as part of our research. Again, the reason we invest a massive amount of money in research, and that is just something that we've kind of historically done. It's not particularly profitable. That research is not paid for, but that research is important because, as someone asked me earlier today, we're not really able, with the way that we work, to work anywhere. We only can work in places where we have asymmetric knowledge, where we can actually go deep in terms of our research. And to do projects all over the world, which sounds great, and every architect, of course, wants to do that, I find it personally really difficult because the amount of investment that we do is enormous to kind of understand a place and understand a culture. We work very closely with the local community, and that brings me back to this girl. So when we presented the project to the city for application, next to our project is a shopping mall developer. I told you I worked for the biggest, actually it's the second biggest, this guy is the biggest. And he, on the same day that we walked in to deliver our project, delivered a counter project. The counter project was, keep the parking and I'll pay for everything. and I'll make a design here, and I'll make a public space. As long as I can park, I'm going to make a big hill. I'm going to stick cars in there. He says, but if you get rid of the parking, the shopping mall will die, many jobs will be lost, and you'll make the biggest mistake of your life. And I'm going to pay for the new project. That was his proposal. The city did not accept our project, said we need to think, walk back to their, let's say, to their offices, and spent a month's time thinking about it, at which point they moved forward with the project. Now, the reason they moved forward with the project is something that we set into motion. This city has something that's really incredible, really unique, something I never really heard of before, but it's called the Shadow City Council. I'm sorry, I'm slow because I'm translating from Norwegian to English. The Shadow City Council is made of under 20-year-old kids who each one, there's a shadow mayor, there's a shadow councilor. So each position in the government has a junior person who shadows the people who are leading the government. They don't have a vote, but they have a voice. They're allowed to speak, but they don't vote. Well, for us to go and fight and prove to the city about the cars and the buses and the high-speed bus again was futile. So we made a simple phone call to the shadow mayor. The shadow mayor, I said, they're going to take away your park, your skate park, etc., if you don't do something. And they went and filibustered and lobbied in the city council, and the city council had no choice but to go forward with the project. For me, that's kind of one of the most exciting kind of moments in my career. Now I'm going to show you the project, because actually the only thing that matters about this project is that story. But this is the project. The train, an elevated train to the top, the ring that divides the project into 3 parts. The bottom is the shopping mall, the right is the park, and then the city hall building. The left, at the top is the station, and the left is this drive-through bus terminal. The right diagram shows a transition from hard surfaces to soft, the multifunctionality that happens within the ring, the identities that are created within the park itself. I'll go through each one of those really. That's the transition. That's for furnishing. The trees have a grid. The ring has the same grid as the trees, so the trees form a grid which was kind of historically there. The structure follows a grid, even though it's a ring, which was obviously structurally challenging to do. Certain programs inserted below the ring. The lighting, the water. The ring, in its special shape, collects all the water and releases it in a waterfall and collects that water. Speaking of which, I forgot. In addition, for the house, I also made him collect all his own rainwater, which for him was an insane idea, but he still does it and uses it to wash his very expensive cars with. The running path, the patterns and surfaces. So this is one of our first collages. As you're standing under the ring, looking into the park. This is the ring under construction. These are our friends. The roof is actually made using a combination of massive timber and glue laminated. You see it here. These are more of our friends. The city has won a prize for the best new city. Every year they give a prize to the best city in terms of its development. And foremost, and it's now won several prizes, and foremost, what really is important for me is that the rationale is inclusiveness, that it's a space where the entire population of the city is able to kind of enjoy. As you see here, I kind of love these pictures, and these are just like phone pictures, let's say. Guy with his baby, which is very common in Norway. Fathers take off, 3 months or sometimes more. This elderly couple, and then of course skaters and people who are using the park. So the park looks like this. The roof looks like that. Mom and dad watching their son. Yeah. There was more, but I'm not going to talk about more. Okay, I'll say one thing about this, which I think is really interesting. It's a really beautiful site in the in the kind of center of Norway, a bit south from Oslo, about 3 hours. It's an existing military base. The military base was taken over and used primarily for people who were going skiing, radical skiing. And so what we did was, in a project back to Aker we talk about invisibility in terms of the design. We made a manual for them, and that manual was super simple. The manual was, and all the visions are on the left. Can we get a hotel room on the top floor? And this is just going through the manual of spaces that we kind of created for them. Here they're saying, can we upgrade the light in the tunnel? This is the train that brings people through, which is an old military installation. Can we upgrade the light? Can we upgrade the light? And so this manual goes through a number of operations. Can we turn this space into a gallery? Can it be a multifunctional space in a gallery? Can people actually use this corridor, which at one moment magically ejects into this fantastic mountain, which looks like this now? This space is now just completed. This is obviously a rendering. This is called the King's Bar. There's no windows. You're deep in the middle of the mountain. So fire, how do you escape? How do you use this space? It's now a bar in the mountain. And if you go up that stair, it brings you to what this facility was ultimately used for, which was listening. So you went to that second floor, and there are people sitting with headphones with kind of incredible installations that would allow them to kind of monitor communications, probably primarily to Russia to the north. That's actually how the room looks, the military room. So the whole reason I'm showing this project is more this mode of working, which was creating this manual and kind of empowering the client to make decisions. This project will go over a course of 20 years. So each of these moves like a layer of paint per year almost. And the last piece, which was the architectural piece, was as you pop out of the mountain, they wanted to make a restaurant. We're at 1,800 meters at that point. And the restaurant looks like that on the bottom right. This is the moment you pop out of the mountain. That is obviously the installation for listening to this conversation. So I think it's my last slide, or I hope it's my last slide. Every time I thought I knew what architecture was, I discovered it was something else. I saw myself as a generalist in a specialist field and a specialist in a generalist field. We all are kind of experts in equitable communities, industrial design, new materials, coding, environmental strategies, decolonization, cultural geographies, circular economies, and systems thinking and design. Obfuscated by all my predispositions about the profession, focused on working a maximum amount of hours to substantiate my resolve and solve problems that were not even asked, I now can say that architecture is, in fact, pretty easy. It is, as so many other things in life, built around one simple idea, listening. Listening is a reciprocal, connective, and incredibly virtuous affair that connects all of us here together today. The listening enables us to answer wicked questions, problems that are nearly impossible to solve, incomplete problems, problems that change in scope and condition, problems that are moving. And that is where our asymmetric knowledge is transformative. You can see conceptual and structural patterns between seemingly unrelated ideas and environments, and the abstract mechanisms behind them. Moving between disciplines, navigating challenging subjects and uncertainty, asking the right questions, and make surprising associations through critical thinking. Your education is as much about unlearning of architecture while building new foundations for a just and equitable future. The profundity of your thinking, a reflection of the social imperative that has encircled us, your ability to make visible what's been blurred for generations while forming a critical spatial practice is inspiring. I love being at Pratt. I'm happy you guys invited me. I am honored to share the stage with Anna for the first time in my life. Thank you. My inspiration and my other inspiration in the back. Really, I just feel kind of, it's an honor to be able to work with you. It's an incredible challenge. I'm incredibly nervous every time I come here, and I hope that we can grow together. Thank you for having us.
And everybody's anxious to sample food outside. There was food outside. It was a lure for the students. Yeah. But we can.
Can we turn off the sound?
I'll just start it off with
Can you not use the mic if you're talking on? It's almost dead. There was another one.
Here.
Is that the one you?
That's the one I was on. Thank you.
I'll give you
yeah, we don't want to keep people from their food, but I'll start off with one question, and then maybe we will, if we don't get any questions from our audience, we have a list of questions from anonymous members of the Pratt community. Right? Yeah. Okay, so, well, actually, I'm going to do two questions, one for each of you. My first question is actually sort of similar to what I asked Dan and Amal. I think this whole idea about Harold Bloom's anxiety of influence, I think, is an interesting one to ponder, in particular because I think we've spoken a lot about the fact that the sort of history of where you each practiced before, your backgrounds, and how that sort of could be a burden or an asset, but certainly an influence on your approach to work. You spoke, Gary, this morning about this sort of exhaustive process of criticality in Rem's office, and I guess we didn't kind of keep going to understand how or if you carry any of that with you today. But I'd be interested to hear if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, this morning we talked about this Salvador Dali kind of paranoid critical method, which was something that was explored in the sense that you are constantly challenging your ideas and killing your darlings, and this almost exacerbated anxiety is something that kind of leads you to a generative process that is continuing to critique and challenge your ideas. I think, first of all, there was an expression which was, which started at that time period, which is called "kill your darlings." So we talked about this idea of killing your darlings, and students were asking me, what does that mean? And it was really a kind of idea that we sometimes become blinded by the things that we kind of discover and like, to an extent that we stop being critical about them. And it was more a question like, how do you continue to test something exhaustively until you're really sure about it, until you're really sure that the idea is kind of sustainable and resilient and flexible and still adaptable. And all of those things are really hard to do for something to maintain all of those fronts. So this idea of the criticality is important. Now, in terms of our practice, I would say, yeah, we do the same without the 80-hour work weeks, because there was something also at that time, which was, I think I mentioned in my lecture about this, almost proving everyone, it was such a ego-driven environment where everyone's almost trying to prove who can work longer than the next person. You're almost looking over your shoulder to see who's going to pass out first on their desk. We don't do that anymore. Definitely don't do that in Norway. You definitely, in Norway, it's kind of like, you have to do a competition between 9 and 5. There's no chance. Literally, in an office in Norway, never work a weekend. Never, ever. Rarely work at night. So So how do you then manage to maintain that, that level of criticality? And I think one of the ways you do that, which I think your generation will be infinitely better at, and I think it relates to Anna's idea about the collective, is that you really have to let go of things. You have to kind of give, you have to trust and give responsibility to other people. And I say it myself, in the office, if we want to have a kind of conversation, if all of us sat here and had a conversation about design, it's like going to a children's party and asking them each to choose one topping for a pizza, which you would get back at the end would be completely inedible. Right? So what we kind of do, and I think that's always the kind of problem with design, but I think it's much easier to talk about strategy. And that's why I use that expression, wicked questions. Wicked questions are difficult, seemingly impossible, sometimes rhetorical, but they, create a kind of strategic conversation that a multitude of people can get on board with. That criticality through strategic kind of thinking, which is a little bit more related to the performative and this idea that I say kind of emerged in the early 2000s, something that was kind of this projective practice. But the big difference is, and that's again where I reiterate, where I think you guys reflect a different generation, is back to that notion which Anna's introducing about authorship and letting go of that kind of, that desperate ego of authorship. I'm telling it to my students all the time. You have groups of teams, and it's ingrained in you. Like, team member number 1 stands up, I did this. Team member 2 stood up and said, I did this. And then I interrupt them and say, but wait, didn't the 3 of us have a conversation about that? Isn't that our kind of idea? And they all stop for a minute. Yeah, you're right. We did this, and we did that, and I think it's still something that a mechanism that you have to kind of work with. It's not natural to kind of do. But the work that we're creating through this place, through these people, through these teachers, through this framework. I think it's really important to, and that's something that's incredibly difficult for my generation to process. Like, incredibly difficult. It's really an egotistical profession, and so that transition, I think, is also related to the conditions that we see in society right now. Your generation, post-COVID, post a multitude of almost inexplicable situations that have happened that have created a commonality between you that's maybe different than any generation before you, I think offers you an enormous potential to explore that space. So.
I wanted to talk about Inception. You did sort of speak sort of procedurally how it came about, but I guess sort of turning this question of influence and inspiration to you, how can you sort of maybe talk to us a little bit about what made you decide that this was a project worth doing, and what was the most surprising or unexpected outcome of the project?
Gotta turn it on. Gotta turn it on.
I was in Oslo, Munch Museum, Modernism exhibition, and in Norway there's a way they're creating the exhibitions. They put together 2 artists and start to analyze them, how actually one of each other were inspired and influenced. And then I was thinking, and I was like, in a way, really weird. It seemed that, putting 2 artists, they're not anymore alive. They're not anymore they never actually worked together, but they kind of start to compare. And that was the moment where I thought about how everything is, of course, connected. So the outcomes. I started with Gary and then it was going all around like 28 countries or so. There were actually some architects which were suggested like a couple of times as a MAL. And yeah, the artworks, they were really starting from the poetry, going into painting, into photography, and not always you kind of actually see the in between the kind of connection, but sometimes you could see when looking at the whole thing together, like how somewhere from the middle, actually, you could feel the reflection from the beginning.
One thing I didn't say that I really was thinking in my mind, that I just think that the range of work that you guys have done is so interesting. I mean, the sort of types of programs that you guys have tackled is, really quite diverse and broad, and really unique. Just not somebody, I can't think of another body of work that's like, ranging from factories to museums to installations. I think it's, that's super interesting, and I guess I guess I'm just, and the other thing about it is the interest and focus on renovations, alterations, and in the past that was always sort of a mode of practice that was considered to be sort of, a lesser kind of less desirable commission. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about the kind of work and your ideas about working with existing structures.
No, I mean, I can start and say that, there was, I forget the year now, was it 2012, when the Venice Biennale, where the Dutch entry to the Venice Biennale was called Vacant NL. And it was Ulle Baumann and some other people that were curating this. And it was a beautiful exhibition of blue foam models where you walked into this beautiful pavilion and the roof had these blue foam models. And those blue foam models showed the extent of vacancy in Holland. And their conclusion was that we actually, through repurposing, would not need to build a new building for the next 25 years if we were able to use the buildings that we had. Now, spin forward 10 years, and you guys all know this fact, but there are, post-COVID, 24 empty Empire State Buildings in New York City. 24, 25. Just a massive amount of emptiness, which, frankly, I don't think it's going to return. I don't think we're going to return to this kind of factory of mega deep floor plates with people sitting in the middle and not seeing daylight the entire day, and rather people shifting to a kind of perspective where they want outdoor space, where they have a different set of values, and I think that vacancy is going to be really hard to address. I think the great thing about these industrial buildings is that they, for one, they give you something automatically, and that's what, when I lecture sometimes about Akebrygge, the factory project on the waterfront in Oslo, there's a much longer lecture and I go really into depth. Today you saw fragments that all were about ideas that related between this humanity, wisdom, and disruption. And that project was gravitating in the direction of disruption. That project was, an incredible archaeology and indexing and erasure and things that in the end are not, there's no one in the city that knows that we did it. There's no kind of plaque that says, that congratulatory. There's no kind of gratuitous things that I didn't get my name on one of the side streets or anything like that. But that invisibility is also something that I really like. I mean, it's like doubled in population. The offices are 98% rented out. So they're under 70% when we got the project. For the last 10 years now, they're at 98%. And the 2% is just so hopelessly unusable corners that they weren't able to partition, that they could never rent anyway. So for them, it's 100%. And those are like, say, so it's always like, how do you benchmark your success when your goal is not necessarily your immediate self-expression, but when you have a kind of goal that is related to a different, let's say, related to this public, related to, for us, I'm always thinking in our projects, there's the building, which has this, ultimately, regardless of the scale of the building, an incredibly small population. And then you have the millions of people who interface, walk past, connect to these spaces. And so a lot of the spaces that you saw and the way I was describing them, like the bazaar, or like this project, it was about this negative space, this in-between space, this gathering space, this social space, the park, the courtyards, the clean cut. And those spaces are something that I always give the utmost attention to, because those are the spaces that me, my kids, my friends, the city all kind of experience. And it's not to say that the building doesn't get an equal amount of attention, but I'm very kind of aware of those kind of dichotomous relations, and it's really important for, let's say, for me in that work. So those projects, they just start with these kind of amazing bones, and often with the developer-driven logistics that we're confronted with today that's increasingly predicated on minimizing risk and maximizing profit, those projects resist that tendency, and they give you something automatically. And so from that perspective, you almost have more agency and license to work with those buildings than you do if someone said, build me a ground-up affordable housing project on a clean slate. It would be much, much more difficult to navigate that process. So there is something nice about that feedback system.
I love to work with historical buildings from the perspective that I feel that back then, when they were building the buildings, they were building, first of all, for many generations up front. They are still standing. And the thought process behind that, back then, they definitely had much more time than right now architects do when they design the buildings. I think back then, I really loved the proportions of the buildings. When we work with historical buildings, usually we are trying as much as possible keep existing functionality to not actually kind of break the proportions. I think right now, a lot of buildings it's always driven by the developers. It's always insane speed. It's always like you don't have enough time actually to think. It's all really mathematical. And yeah, I definitely appreciate always. I appreciate the details behind them, the craftsmen, that it all was made by hand. And I think it's a great base to work with. I would say more, it's not so nice to work with the buildings which are in between, like somewhere, 80s, 90s, or in general, buildings which are kind of like short-lasting, and try to kind of get them in shape.
Howdy. My name is Aveen. I'm a first-year architecture student here, so this is kind of coming from a bit of a naive place. But we were learning about Vitruvius and kind of the transdisciplinary nature of architecture, how we must be artists, designers, engineers, etc. So for the younger of us in the audience who are really inspired by your work and are currently developing a taste of our own, what is your specialty? Where do you fall on the axis between all the disciplines, and how does that affect your work and your process?
I spoke a little bit to it in my introduction and the kind of conclusion. I think there are I'll say it briefly, there are these two camps between what I call range, kind of the generalist, and the specialist. I always say to students, if you go to an interview, there are two types of interviews. One they'll ask you about your skills, and one they'll ask you about your ideas. Always take the job where they ask you about your ideas. The skills are something that you will have. You come from an accredited school, you will have those skills. But you want to work with someone who's interested in your ideas. For me, from my kind of perspective, in terms of where, our work lies, it's really deeply, as I said, we don't work everywhere. We work in places where we feel we can use our asymmetric knowledge. And asymmetric knowledge is really kind of simple. It's like if you go to the doctor and you say, I broke my arm, I want you to fix it, I want you to do it Tuesday, and this is how much I'm willing to pay for it. That's how architects are treated, right? The doctor would laugh and tell you to get out of his office and you'd go somewhere else, right? Because they have asymmetric knowledge. I would say we do as well. And I think cultivating that kind of, and that's what I think is important in your education, is to, both in a way develop really important, especially now more than ever, we speak in a kind of echo chamber. We understand each other, but very few people understand us. The language that we use, the drawings that we make. So first of all, I think what we're constantly doing is we're constantly exploring different ways to communicate. We're constantly looking for different forms of expression, different ways to engage an audience, different ways to involve people in a process. And that for me is really important. So this really deep research that we kind of do that involves, that involves the environment, that involves social issues, that involves geopolitics, that involves this multiplicity of infrastructure and performance, flexibility, of space, the unpredictability of it. It's like an incredible range of things that we need to be able to navigate and curate. And so in a certain way, I think it's as important to be able to enter all of those rooms and curate all of those conversations and contribute and communicate to them. And that's the great thing, I think, about being an architect, that we're able to do that we're able to kind of interface and touch so many aspects of the world in which we operate in. I think it's like, I think it's the coolest profession ever. I was 12 years old, I knew I was going to be an architect. I told my parents I was going to be an architect. When I turned 17, they said, what are you going to do? And I said, I told you when I was 12 what I was going to do. I'm still going to do that. And from that point on, it's kind of what I always wanted to do. And I think it is exactly that expansive agency that we have that makes it, one of the most exciting professions. And just to give you an example, go to a party, everyone wants to talk. I've been to parties, embassy parties, executives, Wall Street parties. They all want to talk to the architect because everyone has a relationship to architecture, to design. And that's what's kind of great. It's it's something that you can really use to your advantage, I think. So.
Maybe one more question.
Hi. Thank you for the lecture. I was wondering.
I didn't have a choice, by the way.
Oh.
So you know. But I did enjoy it.
There's always interesting use of grounds in some of your projects, like V House. I found very interesting, and I couldn't pronounce the name of the park you worked on. What is your idea of how you approach the ground in any architectural project, and is there a difference between a public project and a private project? And how does an architect be fearless yet remain respectful to the ground that he operates on, because it's such a public space?
It's actually a really good question. I'm not sure I have a really good answer, but it's a really good question. Almost all the projects that you saw, I think Briggers is the same. They're all like incredibly toxic, incredibly poisoned. It's industry that was there. Rutan was a bus depot and parking lot, which was just inundated with kind of chemicals and oil, etc. The Varner House was, of course, insanely beautiful and untouched land. You know, honestly, what I can say is that I'm guessing here, but I don't think I differentiate between public and private. I think that you know, one of the ways that I work is, you know, is pretty surreptitiously. You know, we are, as we work in this world that Anna was describing, that's increasingly accelerated. The decision-making process is so short. The opportunity for design is increasingly limited. In those situations, we are, let's say, we're always looking for these opportunities, almost invisible opportunities to, frankly, to exploit a situation. Because the work that we're doing here, the work that you see, I would argue that no one's asking for it, right? No one asks us to remove the cars. No one asks us to remove the buses. No one asks us to redesign the infrastructure. No one asked us to not cantilever the house way over the landscape and make this kind of a gigantic gesture. No one asked us to remove the wall and open up the factory. They didn't want it. So we're kind of creating these fights, these conflicts with a strong intention of interconnections, of interfaces, and how that ultimately relates to the landscape. You know, in each of those kind of cases, I mean, Norway is very specific. It has this incredibly beautiful landscape, usually. When it's not industrialized, not brownfield, it's kind of radically. There's almost no landscape architects in Norway. You almost don't need it. Like, the landscape gives you so much that it's almost daunting to kind of work in it. That's why you guys all look at Norway and you're like, oh my God, look at this kind of rusted steel cantilever from the side of a mountain with a little bit of concrete, and it's like incredibly romantic. That's like a fraction of the work that they actually do. A lot of it is the same crap that I think has inundated the modern project for a long time. So don't be fooled by all those cute little kind of roadside projects that you see in Norway. It's not the reality, I guarantee you that. But the landscape is insanely beautiful, and it gives you a kind of lot. So for us, in a certain way, you know, like Anna and I are kind of avid hikers. Today we were just talking about the garbage problem in New York. You know, when you go hiking, it's really fascinating. You are going deep into nature, no phone connection. You have to carry everything. We can go for a week, 2 weeks hiking, and come back with this much garbage. We're just like incredibly observant of that. The Varner House, forcing him to collect the rainwater. It rains so much in Norway, you don't need to collect the rainwater. It's like it's constantly there. We forced him to do it because he could. And that could be something that would impact a culture. He had the connection to do it. So everything that we're kind of doing, not just landscape, but also related to nature, is really like all the projects that we're working on are self-sustaining. All the projects you saw, I think almost all of them are using geothermal energy. We're using the anaerobic digestion. For me, landscape is also about this relationship to energy, the relationship to the environment, and the protection of that kind of environment, I think, is as much. So I'm not a landscape designer, and I don't claim to be. I don't try to be, but I am conscious and respectful of landscape, and I think it's important. Yeah, landscape. You work more with landscape than I do.
I would say that it's always a question of why and who. Who meaning who is the client, what is the project, and why we should do it. Like, are we on the same page with the client? Do we share the same ideas? Are we understanding each other? And it does not matter, do we work for a private client, or it's a museum, it's a factory building, affordable housing, or the Christ Center for kids. So it's always, I would say, we're starting with those two questions, and we're working all scales. I'm personally coming from Riga, from Latvia. It's a really small country. We're less than 2 million. And when you start the work, when I started, I never worked for anybody else except myself. After I graduated, I straight away opened a company, and there is no possibility to, for example, focus on something one that I would choose, like, okay, I want to work only with museums. It's just not possible. You just, everything you can get, you work with. And I think that, in a way, gave a lot of experience and a lot of understanding and a lot of afterwards you can use all the knowledge in actual other, like, kind of new projects.
Now, before the next question, I just want to say one more thing to what Anna was just saying, and also about this, the breadth of the kind of portfolio and work. So, two things. One, I disagree a little bit with what she said, because I am, I guess my dad would say, thick-headed. So I believe I can corrupt even bad clients, meaning I can kind of somehow navigate their painfully short-sighted processes and feel that I can always find an opportunity inside of it. It's not always the case, but on the other hand, if you look at the Space Group website, it's not a selection of projects, it is the portfolio. So I think there is this moment, and of course there are projects that we call X projects. Internally, it's kind of what we call them. But there is also, for me, I see an opportunity, and that's what I loved about the studio I saw today, when I saw just these models, these incredibly rich models that were shown to me. You know, I see the potential for an X project in almost, you know, everyone that kind of approaches us, even the most corporate of our clients. In some ways, the more corporate they are, the easier they are, because they don't really have any ambition except making money. And once we agree on that once we have that question out of the way, how much money do you need to make? Okay, everything else is on me. There is something interesting about that kind of opportunity. So sometimes even more corporate clients. But like I said, each of the projects are like, I mean, that's why the word disruptive, for example, when you look at the Varner House, that, you know, this kind of seemingly magical edge of the roof, well, it actually is magic. Number one, it's titanium. Sorry, no one will never build with titanium, but it's the whole edge of the roof is done in titanium, done for a reason, because of the climate. The heat and cold means that you want to minimize your coefficient of expansion. And then the entire roof, 20 years later, is attached with 3M tape, double-sided tape. That's the detail for that edge. Butt detail, double-sided 3M tape. There's a bracket, there's tape, this white tape that's like 1 millimeter thick and applied, and it's been there for 20 years. I don't think they could get it off if they wanted to. But all those kind of experiments we also kind of, let's say, pushed. I know we're not talking about landscape, but I wanted to mention that just in terms of an approach towards clients. Yeah, sorry I didn't answer so much about landscape, but I do love landscape. Last question there.
Oh, okay. It
We
should be
promised
short.
him,
It'll
and he
have to be
waved his
short.
hand a lot.
Yeah, okay.
I won't
It'll have
say
to be
much.
short, just because we are.
Thrown out?
Being kicked out, yeah.
We're thrown out? Really? Are the police coming? Okay. Quickly.
Yes.
Make it a yes/no question, please.
Thank you. Sorry about that, but yeah. I was there for your earlier session in the morning, so I was part of the MR1 class. So, yeah. So my question is with respect to the talk in the morning and the talk that you just did now. So you spoke a lot about challenging new obstacles, trying to find new ways, and you also spoke about ego playing a huge part. So I want to know what your opinion is with the role of failure, and have you ever encountered something that you still remember, and how did you deal with it, or what did you take out from it?
Are you asking me if I ever failed?
I mean,
Daily.
yeah, but I want to ask you.
Daily.
I want to ask you your opinion on it. Like, what role would it play with all of this happening?
No, I mean, back to what I said about this kind of, let's say, critical method that we talked about killing your darlings. I think it's incredibly important. And that's ultimately, if you're relating it to engineering, it's testing things to failure, right? And it's that moment, you know, my son is a downhill skier, professional downhill skier. The skiers who are most successful are the ones who are at the limit, you know, and everything at the limit. And of course, at one moment, even like Lindsey Vonn, a great American skier, has had a zillion really horrific accidents, but also one of the most prolific women skiers of all time. That's because she's pushing that limit of failure. I think we do it in our profession as well. And I think that's why I was talking about this exhaustive process. Happily, Alex kind of brought it back from this insanely exhaustive process to a more reasonable, inclusive, exhaustive process that we do as architects now. But I think that understanding of failure is important. And I think embracing it, discussing it, doing it collectively, it's not just like, you know, succeeding collectively, but failing kind of, and understanding that and using each other in that process, I think is really important. I think, I can't emphasize enough the importance of kind of failure. So I do it every day, multiple times. So if you want, I can write it down when it happens. So, do you want to say about failure? Last word? She'll confirm about mine.
No, when you're talking about it, I thought that actually, if you look back to the failures, then sometimes the ones you thought are failures came up that they are not. And a lot of looking backwards, you see the things which you thought as a big success, and actually they are failures.
Gary and Nana. And we look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you for staying so long.
Thank you.
It's very rare